Hello, welcome to paper 2 of the AQA 8700 English Language GCSE, and the focus is question 4. My resource today is the Specimen Material 1, which you can find on AQA's website. Question 4 is worth 16 marks, and you have 1.5 minutes per mark on this paper, so that's 24 minutes to answer this question. Let's have a look at how many pages the examiners give you. So that's nearly 1 page, that's 2 pages, and that's 3, and that's 4. So they're anticipating really good candidates being able to write a hell of a lot here. And they don't expect you to fill the space, by the way. So you can still get a top mark without filling it, but in your revision, you should be aiming to fill that whole page, that whole space. And then gradually you'll learn how to write the same ideas in fewer words. When my guide comes out, I teach you how to do that. Okay, well, I calculate my timings by giving you this advice. The exam paper will tell you to read for 15 minutes, and that's really bad advice. That's given to you by examiners who haven't sat the exam. I have sat the exam, and it doesn't give you enough time. So I would start answering your questions as soon as you get the paper. Now, let's get into this question. You will always be asked to look at the whole of source A, and you'll probably be asked to look at the whole of source B, although in this case, source B is 2 letters and they're only asking you to focus on the father's letter. Hopefully you will have remembered to bring a highlighter to the exam, and so you will be highlighting as I am, so you remember what things to actually write about. You want to write about the father's letter rather than the son's. You will always be asked to compare the 2 sources in this case. So let's take a look at them now. Paper 2 will always have an insert, and source A will always be modern, 21st century or 20th century, and source B will always be a 19th century text. So you really do need to read some 19th century fiction in your revision in order to get good at this exam. Now, before we get to the mark scheme, the AQA exam board are giving us some important clues in their specimen paper. So clue number 1, could you do your child's homework, is that they're going to choose questions which don't really need a high level of general knowledge. And now that's a problem for you if you're a high achieving student who wants to get 7, 8 or 9, or in old money an A and an A star. And the reason that's a problem is it's very difficult to get ideas that lots of other students don't have, because it's a really familiar idea that you'll be faced with in the exam. And so distinguishing yourself from other readers, other candidates, is going to be difficult. The good news is if you're not aiming for at least the A grade, then you're not going to be faced with any reading that's particularly difficult. So you can still achieve. Okay, well, the other way that this is dumbed down in a way is that terms that are difficult are explained to you. So here you find out that Pac-Man is an old computer game and that conga is an old-fashioned dance. So again, you're penalised if you're an avid reader when you would have known this, but other candidates wouldn't. So we can infer from this that the 19th century literary non-fiction is the one where the examiners want to test your real ability to read and decode unfamiliar language. And you'll see that the language of the 19th century text is always more demanding and more difficult. In this case, though, it's also shorter, which is good news for you. However, because I've highlighted the question, I've remembered to scan down and find the second letter, which is from the father of Henry. So this will be the correct source. Again, it's quite small, and again, I get translations of terms that I might not otherwise have understood. Okay, so I've learned that if I'm a good reader, I'm not going to find the text too challenging. So the challenge is going to be in the skills of answering the question. The examiner's mark scheme, here it is, gives us the assessment objective that they're looking for. This is really useful to you because it shows you what the examiner's got in their head. Compare writers' ideas and perspectives, in other words, their point of view, as well as how these are conveyed. So how things are conveyed are this word in the question, the methods. You're talking about the methods that they've used. So what are the methods? Well, you might have learnt them as daft forest or other kinds of mnemonic. In the guide that I'm writing, I've refined this to Mad Father's Crotch, which gives us 15 persuasive techniques. And I'll go through these in later videos or in a couple of weeks. Hopefully you'll be able to buy the guide. But it's important to remember that Mad Father's Crotch is a mnemonic. It's not really a thing. So you can't write, the author uses Mad Father's Crotch techniques. That's just not a thing, as it were. You'd have to write that the author uses rhetorical devices. Okay, well, let's now look at the skills that the examiner's after. So at the top of the level, they want you to compare ideas and perspectives, in other words, their points of view. Then they want you to analyse, and the analysis has to be about the methods. So you're going to name those rhetorical devices. Then you have to select a range of quotations. That's what supporting detail means. And then you've got this examiner word, judicious, which doesn't really mean anything. It just means that, oh, I think that's a really well-chosen quotation. Well, how do you decide on a well-chosen quotation? I'll show you that when we look at the examiner's exemplar answer in a minute. Then it asks you to show a detailed understanding. Again, an examiner will look, oh, well, what's detailed? Oh, I don't know what detailed is. And really what they'll do is see, are you filling the pages? Do you have lots of quotations? That's simply what that will mean to an examiner's gut reaction. So as you can see in the way I've phrased this, the skills to look for aren't always that helpful. 2-3 examiners could completely disagree. So what the exam board does is offer you some examples of the sorts of sentences that students could use, and we're going to learn a lot from that now. So here are the 2 exemplar paragraphs, one for level 4 and one for level 3, and I'm going to take you through the differences so you can see what the examiner is looking for. So the first point is the examiner wants you to begin with the writer's name, their full name. They do that also in level 3, and then as you carry on writing you will only use the surname, so in future paragraphs. So that's point number 1. Okay, in the level 3, the student here takes a long time to make a point. So presents his attitude to parenting in a humorous way. And the key bit that the examiner is focusing on here is in a humorous way. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying that, but what we'll see is this candidate here makes exactly the same point. J. Rayner uses humour. And annoyingly, although you're making exactly the same point, this one is phrased more economically. It uses humour as the abstract noun, a thing, whereas this has a noun phrase, if you like, to describe it. And so this candidate is simply getting penalised here for using more words to say the same thing. Now, I'm laughing about that because you would expect this to be a test of reading, wouldn't you? Because this is a reading question. But actually it's not. It's also a test of how well you write. So in your writing, you need to practice this skill of saying the same thing in fewer words, and using abstract nouns will always do that. For example, instead of saying it was a problem because he was hungry, you can turn that into an abstract noun and say the hunger was a problem. And it's a shorter way, a more economical way of making your point. Okay, well, the next thing that English teachers don't like is a phrase like this, when he says, because yes, it's true that J. Rayner says that. So you'd think to yourself, well, why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem because the whole letter is what J. Rayner says. Sorry, that's not the letter, that's the article. The whole article is what J. Rayner says. So it's redundant. That's a superfluous, which means extra, not needed, a superfluous bit of information. So here's your quotation, which is introduced here with what he says, but look up here. There's no introduction of this kind of clumsy thing saying this is what J. Rayner says. And well, why don't you need to say that? Well, it's obvious when you think about it. The quotation marks say, I'm quoting, this comes from the text. And because the whole text is written by J. Rayner, it must be true this is what J. Rayner says. So you never put that in to your writing. Okay, the next thing that we need to notice is the choice of quotation. So here, the candidate has spotted that they grow up, take the mickey out of you, has spotted that this is a humorous quotation, and so it's well chosen. Well, why isn't it judicious? You know that word, that examiner speak that we wondered about earlier? Well, let's go and look at this one. Too busy killing things on Skype. Okay, so this is also humorous, and we got the emotive language. But what makes it more judicious than that one? You know, they're the same length, they're both about humour. What makes it judicious? Well, here's the answer. The word both. The word both tells us that this one quotation can give the candidate an opportunity to say two things about it. So he's going to be able to write about the attitudes to parenting and the relaxed attitude he has not just to his son but to the education of his son. So this candidate can now write two things about this quotation, whereas at level 3 the candidate has chosen a quotation where they can only say one thing, that it's the attitude to parenting. And that is why this one is judicious, because this candidate can say two things about it. So your top tip is to either find quotations you can say two things about, or say two things about every quotation. I favour the idea of picking the quotations that you notice and then trying to say two things about them. So for example here, his attitude to parenting might be that it's a humorous one, but also you could talk about the lack of respect demanded from the child. In fact, this lack of respect is seen as a sign of affection. I'm just using exactly the same quotation, but finding a second thing to say about it, and therefore appearing judicious to the examiner. Right, the other thing that makes this answer better is this bit I've highlighted in green. He refers to his own education using self-deprecating humour, however. So it's introducing a second point connected to the first. Now, really the examiner's cheating here because my level 3 student here could have introduced this point, if I just copy it, down here. After they've dealt with this paragraph, this could be the follow-on paragraph. So actually this is a pretend skill, and I don't want to teach you to necessarily put that information with this one. In fact, what I would do is the opposite. I would have your points that you've made about this quotation, then contrast them with whatever's in the next paragraph, and then your next point will be how this humour is self-deprecating. But it's up to you. You don't have to do that. I'm just trying to show you that the examiner's cheating a bit here. Having that sentence there isn't what makes this one different, because the logical thing would be this writer would then go on to talk about self-deprecating humour. But what they wouldn't do, well, you can guess actually, if I just say read that, which language wouldn't the level 3 writer use? Well, it would probably be this one, wouldn't it? The self-deprecating, which means putting yourself down, not taking yourself too seriously. So having the right vocabulary will also force the examiner to give you a higher mark. Even in the level 3 answer, you have to write about the writer's tone. So here, this student has described the tone as more distant. So that's a huge tip, because you won't even get into the level 3 if you don't write about the author's tone. So make sure you do. And if we go back up here, self-deprecating, of course, is the description of the writer's tone here. And you could argue that this is a more sophisticated description of tone than the more distant one. Both are equally accurate. Yeah, it's just that this is an idea that depends on you having a great vocabulary, whereas this one, well, you don't need such a great vocabulary. You could have called him cold or unfeeling or distant. You know, there are lots more alternatives. Now, I've just used the word tone, and this is important because if we go back to the skills that the examiners said they were looking for, tone isn't there. But what they have is ideas and perspectives, and tone is how writers give you their ideas and perspectives. Because this is so important, in my guide I've got a whole section on the writer's tone, which goes on for quite a bit. That will really help you if you're trying to understand how to write about the author's viewpoint and purpose. There are other little tricks that the examiner's playing with us. So let's look at the examiner's introduction to a contrasting point. It's a bit naughty that the examiners haven't shown us what the contrasting point to J. Rayner would be. But what they are telling you is that once you've made a detailed point about the 21st or the 20th century text, J. Rayner's, then you go on and directly compare that to something in the other text. And the clue is in the language, direct contrast. That's another way of saying that it's an almost exact opposite. Well, what does the level 3 candidate do? They use the right connective, which is whereas, but whereas just says, oh, this is a bit different, whereas direct contrast says this is exactly opposite. So it's a more precise form of language, and it also means that you'd have to find a quotation which had the direct attitude, direct opposite attitude to humour. And because it was directly opposite, that would be more evidence that you were picking exactly the right quotations to write about. They would be picked judiciously. It would be a judicious quotation. Whereas here, you could just pick any quotation that was different. Well, that is good news for you, because it means that if you're struggling in the exam, you don't have to think of the best quotation. You can just pick any old quotation which shows a difference, and you're still going to get into the level 3. Okay, so remember that. Don't panic and think, oh, I've got to find the best one each time. And what I always say to my students is writing is thinking. Don't spend ages trying to find the best quotation. If it's taking time, put down a quotation, write about it, and the chances are you'll find a better one later on and you'll be able to write about that. To find out how much time this will take you in the exam, you must practice, of course. And if you want to do that practice paper and email me your answers by posting them as a comment on my channel, I could well mark them and give you a video to show you how you've done. Okay, and then the final thing that I need to show you is how the writer chooses, how the candidate chooses to write about methods. So one method, of course, was humour, and in the level 4 answer, this candidate is also going to write about the simile, whereas here there's a more general description of the technique, phrases. And so phrases aren't particularly a technique, because everything's written with phrases really. So this candidate isn't getting into the 4 because they're not writing about particular techniques consistently. Yes, they're writing about humour, so they're getting the mark, and they're also writing about phrases, which is a kind of cheat way of getting into the level 3. But actually naming the right ones is going to carry a lot of marks. Well, that's really good news, because these are so simple to remember, and of course they come up all the time. Interestingly, Simile isn't one of my mad father's crotch techniques because similes are descriptive techniques much more than they are persuasive techniques. So I take issue slightly with the example that the examiners have given us because I don't think it's actually hard enough. And if you go to my guide, I'll show you how to write much better responses than this, so that actually getting a level 4 becomes easy. Reason that's important is because the guide is going to be called the Mr. Salles Guide to 100% in AQA English Language. So I'm going to take you on a journey that will give you the very highest possible marks. Why not? Who wouldn't want to get 100%? So there you go. I hope you found that useful. If you want more help, watch out for the guide. It should be published soon. And post me any comments of things that you'd like to know based on this question. And obviously, don't forget to subscribe for more videos. Thank you.